it. Let me go ahead and just get my screen. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going to hit the buttons. Okay, so I'm going to try to set this up very quickly. Pardon, so I apologize for the getting this set up. Okay, can you see my screen okay? Yes, no, maybe so? Okay, great. Well, thank you. I don't know if I sound great, but I'll take that you can at least hear me. I'll take, we'll start, we can build on that. So my name is Peter Murphy. It sounds like I've already been a brief introduction. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm excited to speak with you. That's great. Thanks for using the chat. That's awesome. I'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. I'm excited to be able to join you remotely. I wish I could be there in person. I've heard nothing but great things about Haines. It's one of the last places on my list in Southeast Alaska to get to, but I'm very excited someday to make that a reality. So for great things. So I apologize a little bit. I had a slight computer issue on my end, so I'm having to recycle slides a little bit more than I had intended, but still hopefully I think in line with what we talked about in targeting. So kind of a little bit of an outline. We're going to talk about marine debris in general. You know, what is this stuff? Why is it bad? And then a little bit about Alaska marine debris, specifically to focus on some of the impacts and challenges and costs that are associated with it, both in terms of environmental costs and in terms of dollars and cents costs. So the resource side, there's also obviously different ways to think of cost. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some specific projects that are exemplary of some of those aspects that are unique in marine debris in Alaska. And then a little bit about marine debris in the Arctic, which is obviously a growing area of work and focus for the marine debris issue globally. And then get into the what's next. And then at right, there's just a picture of marine debris on the Alaskan shoreline, as well as a Earth Day an Earth Day card that my son made for me. I have not brainwashed him aggressively on marine debris topics, I promise. But I got this, which I think was really exciting. I think in terms of the context of what we can all be doing and just the penetration or the awareness of these issues and about actions we can all be taking in terms of taking care of things. I have other stories about him guilting me about when he thought I wasn't composting something, but which I was. I would like to note, but that's for another day. So first, just a tiny bit about Marine Debris Program. We were established in 2006 by Congress as the federal lead for marine debris. Practically, that really means not lead in terms of manage, that means lead in terms of facilitate and support. We recognize that there are so many groups doing amazing work on marine debris as one of many things they do. You guys are a great example of that. So the mission for many organizations that do marine debris work is much broader than just marine debris. We have the duty and the privilege of it being our main thing. It's our day job. So we get to focus on that. So we work in areas of removal, going out picking stuff up debris, research, better understanding where debris is, prevention, trying to change behaviors to reduce debris getting into the ocean in the first place, and then response as well. So a lot of marine debris that's in the oceans comes from everyday leakage or chronic behaviors or accidents. But there's also marine debris that comes from large-scale events, like the tsunami that impacted Japan in 2011 is one, now a while ago example, but one that was impactful in Alaska in many ways. But other things like container spills, other events. And we're supported through Save Our Seas 2.0. That's the act of Congress. So they have to reauthorize these different programs like ours. I'd only highlight that specifically because the Alaska delegation has been huge champions of the issue of marine debris. Senator Sullivan, Murkowski, Sola, and before them too. So it's been something we're really grateful for. I highlight the grants and funding vehicles is one of the things we do is we get money from the government and then we give it out. So we do our own work, but we also support work across the country. And that's through grants. Right now, there's a removal grant. That's been a focus lately because of the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's been a lot more funding available, and we've received a significant amount to be able to push out through grants, which is awesome. But that has meant that research and prevention grants, that's why they're red, they've been scaled back hopefully temporarily while we're kind of focused on working on this. But I highlighted in purple response because right now there's also a Merbach area impact grant that's open right now. So that's an important one. So it just kind of shows there's some ebbs and flows, as you guys are all probably experienced looking at government funding, but certainly we try to do what we can with what we get. So marine debris itself. Well, practically when we talk about marine debris, and I think you've probably heard about this and from others too, but practically when we talk about it, we are talking about just a huge range of items. And that's something that one of the other hats I wear is I work on remote sensing. So Alaska is my primary focus, but sort of we all wear a few different hats in the program. One of that is for me trying to keep an eye on remote sensing technologies like UAS or drones, satellites, all sorts of things, aerial, small planes, helicopters, ways to go out and find debris or capture it. And that's one of the things that's tricky about marine debris is it's so varied. Whereas other objects, you can tune a target, you can tune something like an algorithm, like we talk about machine learning or AI, right? You can do that by training things to look inside an image for the right type of thing. Well, marine debris, you're talking about everything from tiny to huge and shapes and sizes and colors. It's just too many. So that's a challenge. So we have, you can see in this image examples of, derelict vessels from Alaskan shoreline there, an unfortunate dumping area where people have disposed of a lot of old vessels. You also have derelict fishing gear. So those are crab pots from Southeast Alaska. That's from a project in just south of Juneau back in several years ago. And so that's an example. But then center, that's a picture from Gore Point on the Gulf of Alaska shoreline. So that was where we were out cleaning up, and that's just a little piece of foam plastic that someone had that was there and someone picked up. So it really shows just the breadth of the size and scope of the issue. So practically, what does that mean? Well, it's really, what we look at is these are primarily made of plastics. And, that's not to villainize plastics as a substance. The reality is, for me, like my glasses are plastic, the computer monitor I'm looking at is plastic or in large parts. There's a lot of good uses of plastics, but the reality that when they're the same thing makes them great, their durability, adaptability, duration makes it great in day-to-day use, persistent use, makes them a problem out in the environment. So they're non-biodegradable. So you see that in microplastics, so both directly produced, like little tiny things, but also indirect, where big things become microplastics over time. And those can have impacts through ingestion by animals or chemical impacts. So plastic can absorb toxins and then release them, or there can be chemicals, that were added to the plastic in order to give it certain properties. So clarity, flexibility, those sort of things. Plasticizers, these chemicals are called, that have the potential to be released when they're ingested. And the research on that is ongoing, but it's certainly an ongoing concern as well. And then derelict fishing gear. So obviously Alaska, the number one, two of the top three ports by weight for landing in the United States. And a huge fishery industry in the state, as well as obviously the very important commercial, recreational, and subsistence fishing as well. That you're going to have naturally some loss from those fishing. Even the best fishers lose gear sometimes. And then there's not to speak of actors who maybe aren't as good or aren't as well intentioned. So when you add that all up, it can add up to a lot of fishing gear that can continue to ghost fish for a long time after it's lost. The impacts of that, entanglement or entrapment. So again, this is an image that's from Stickeen River Flats outside of Wrangell. But we saw fishing gear that was lost that was still continuing to catch Dungeness crab in this case for 7 years after it was lost. So in this case, we actually could find the tags and do the math. And so you think about how many crab a crab pot could catch over 7 years of continuous fishing, and the fact that it wouldn't be just catching target species, it'd be catching non-target species or females as well as males. All those things. It's can potentially have an impact on the fishery at a larger scale, and that's the same for fishing nets as well as other items. And the reality is, of course, that it's somewhat not quite out of sight, out of mind, but certainly out of sight, out of count, maybe. is that it's difficult to quantify the impact of these fishing gear once they're lost, because how do you follow around a fishing net floating around, right? How do you keep an eye on these crab pots? There's, that's a challenging thing to do. And so we know that when we see data from the Pribilof Islands for seals, as an example, or the Southeast too, or Gulf of Alaska in general, for entangled seals, they're noticed when they're on shore or in the water. Obviously, that's an undercount because those are the ones that made it. Those are the ones who survived the initial encounter with the entangling debris. Similarly with whales, whales that maybe wash up, there might be sometimes evidence of injury. But whales that are taken or stranded, they wash up deceased. Those animals, you don't know, what the counts are. So it's certainly a big challenge and a big issue of the overall environmental cost of marine debris. So these are just images to show kind of some of those. Obviously, this one at top left is a pinniped that's been entangled, and obviously, I chose kind of an image that's not quite so graphic, but certainly there's a lot of the ones that are pretty disturbing and sad, really, to see the animal in that much distress. And obviously that has a direct impact on their ability to function, to feed, to breed, and to function just in general through the normal lifespan. As well as bottom left, there's also cost impacts and risks for fishing gear. For this in case is a vessel that was entangled. So you also have human health and safety, not just in terms of plastics as microplastic ingestion, which is an area of concern, and one that there's more research being done and still more research to be done, but also just direct physical safety. Obviously, I'm sure many of the folks in the room or listening or folks who've been out and spent a good amount of time out on boats. The reality that losing power, getting your prop entangled, on a nice day, that's an annoyance, and could cost some time. On the wrong kind of day, that can be a real issue to life and limb for the folks involved. So certainly the impacts extend beyond the very important environmental impacts as well as to human health and safety. So talking a little bit about marine debris in Alaska more broadly is that marine debris in Alaska is certainly, there's a huge amount of debris in Alaska, and not just when you add up all the miles of shoreline, of course, there's going to be a lot. We all know Alaska has most shoreline in the United States by far. By some estimates, as much as the rest of the United States combined. There's the counts on that are always tricky, but practically, the reality is that when you add it all up, even on a unit, on a beach by beach basis, you still see some of the highest debris densities that we have data for in the U.S. and to some extent globally are on Alaskan shorelines, especially in the Gulf of Alaska. So that's really points to just the amount of debris that's present. And that comes from a number of things. Of course, the sources aspect is important. You have direct versus indirect. We talked about earlier. Debris not only comes from everyday actions directly into the water, so loss of items in the water, but also upstream that wash out. So that's a direct versus indirect. But then also in Alaska, an aspect that's increased importance is the reality of local versus distant debris. So you have debris that's coming from far away onto Alaskan shorelines, whether that's far away is a few horizons over, whether a vessel or another location, or that can be hundreds of miles away. So, but it's not coming from the local community. And in many places, these, catcher beaches or hotspots, they're so far from a community that, of course, it's not coming from anywhere. It's not driven by population density the way it is in other parts of the world. Obviously, that's all stuff that you guys are likely very much aware of and see and feel in your interactions with the environment. But something that I always try to reinforce in my conversations with folks back east is sort of these differentials because of how they drive the realities of what marine debris in Alaska looks like. And that points to those challenges below. The access, many of these locations are far from far from communities. So, it takes a while to get there by boat or, sometimes by aircraft. Seasonality, of course, it's the reality of rhythms of when you can get out to these places. And then disposal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that all points to much higher costs. For a lot of parts of the country, you get your 15 closest friends, some gloves, some garbage bags, and maybe a van if you need it. You got yourself a cleanup because you can just go out to the beach and you walk on your nice gravel trail out to the beach, and then you bring it back and there's a dumpster there. That's it. The logistics are pretty streamlined. Obviously, that's not the case for a lot of these places where it requires a lot more innovation and ingenuity to get to and address the debris. And also connecting the dots there between the local and distant, as well as the overall challenges, is that the reality of identifying where debris comes from is a big issue, and a challenging one is the reality that debris, doesn't real often come with fingerprints, if you will. And as much as people like to think so, or that we would love to have it, we don't have a marine debris CSI lab where we can, fingerprint this stuff back. So a lot of items are relatively generic, and you can sort of make, educated or informed guesses or informed analysis of where it may have come from, but tracing it back definitively to a source is very difficult, and that makes it challenging. So I already talked a little about this, the local activities versus distant, the fishing, open ocean debris. Something I want to highlight just briefly is, obviously I can't look at in the room, but these fly swatters were an example in the Gulf of Alaska a number of years ago. More recently, the Yeti coolers and the bike helmets. But these are items where, this was from a container spill. So these fly swatters with American sports team names. You can see the Kansas Jayhawks, like the Penn State, there's Oklahoma, there's a few others. I know there was hockey, there was basketball, there was a lot in there. But anyway, these were spilled and lost all over the Gulf of Alaska. So sometimes you have these container spills, which are becoming more frequent to some extent with increased storm strength, as well as, massive amounts of international shipping that are a part of the overall debris issue. That's an important aspect of the reality, as well as in different parts of the state, the reality of shoreline erosion from formal and informal dump disposal sites, as well as just general infrastructure. So communities themselves, sadly, where you're getting mobilization and introduction of debris from those as well. So practically, you have all this debris from different sources, but a key point I just want to mention briefly is the reality that debris from across the globe, is from across the Pacific Rim, can make its way to Alaska, driven by these currents, which bring a lot of debris up into the Gulf of Alaska. So you have the Kuroshio current, which comes North Pacific, and then branches to the north to Alaska, the Alaska current, to the South California current. So these counterclockwise circular current or generally circular in the Gulf of Alaska can bring debris from the open ocean up towards these communities and up into Southeast Alaska. Excuse me. And combined with storm activity, especially in the winter, you have these debris can be brought closer to shore and then driven ashore by storms. So it aligns with the realities of what we see with a lot of debris from far away that can make its way to Alaska in combination with more local activity. And you see that in the data. This is data from Alaska, the top left, and California, Oregon, and Washington at the top right. So you can see some similarities. Hard plastic is quite similar. Foam plastic, a bit different, a little bit less in Alaska. But film plastic is less. But you notice if you add up all of these elements, plastic rope and net, buoys and floats, these different aspects that are nominally fishing related, you see a much higher percentage of that within Alaska data. And that just points to the prevalence of fishing activity both in Alaska in general, but also in the data for in terms of open ocean debris that can also include fishing activity. So I want to talk just briefly about the Alaska marine debris community, and I'm going to breeze through this slide quickly, not because everyone on this list isn't important. It's actually the exact opposite. The reason for this is I want to point out that I mentioned earlier, the marine debris community in Alaska is incredibly strong and diverse and innovative and inspiring, frankly. It's amazing. And so what I want to highlight in this is always just that there's a lot of groups working on the issue, as part of their portfolio. And this is not, it's a sample of partners on this list, but it's just to point out there's a lot of different groups working across the spectrum. Every time I look at this list, I'm like, oh man, I should have put on blank, and all these things. But I think it's just a point that there are so many groups working, and it's something that's important to recognize, and I think is really points to the need and value in collaboration across the community. So I mentioned earlier the disposal challenges for marine debris in Alaska, and the reality of that. And I think that something that I just wanted to circle back on to give a little more context is, for those of you done cleanup, obviously you're probably keenly aware of this, but the reality that there are varied approaches to marine debris disposal, but it's always, well, I shouldn't say always, very commonly a big challenge. And one of the first things that a project needs to think about is how are we going to dispose of this debris? And that's really, the concept that really local landfills often they can accept debris legally. And so when I say can but don't, what I mean by that is not can like, they could, but they just choose not to. It's that they can legally, but they don't because of the reality of costs as well as just capacity. They don't have very much space. And so that's something that's a big issue. And so that means that sometimes the cleanups are often looking at where do they ship the debris to. That can be a hub community that may have more capacity, like Anchorage, Kodiak, and Juneau. I've highlighted those here, but there are other examples of debris being shipped to Yakutat or Ketchikan, although Ketchikan typically is shipped it onto the lower 48. Then that reality that oftentimes outside shipping is what's required. So that's where you need to get the debris to. So often shipping to, I put the red dot, that's the primary landfill for Seattle and to some extent Portland is over in just south of Roosevelt, Oregon. So it's off the Columbia River, but it's a massive facility. And so a lot of debris that is shipped, makes its way to Seattle or to Tacoma, and then makes its way into a more standard waste stream, like standard meaning like just kind of it's introduced along with all of the municipal waste from those cities, and then it goes to that landfill. So it's kind of crazy to think about that, the reality of debris being picked up somewhere in the Bering Sea may end up in Eastern Oregon. But that's a reality of what the costs look like and what needs to be internalized when you're thinking about what it looks like to plan a cleanup. Again, not always. There's certainly situations where people come up with amazing solutions. I know you've heard from other folks on recycling, which is great. And I kind of included that simplified graphic of kind of the hierarchy of the idea of, ideally you're looking at trying to find ways to reduce how much goes into disposal, into landfill. And so the more things you can recycle, the more things you can reuse, certainly reduce and prevent, or, better and better. But, and it's great to have recycling coming in above the landfill as an option. But that's a reality of debris cleanup in Alaska, of course, is that you do need to have those thoughts and or think through those things early on. That's something that I know Christina's part of the conversation. There's been a lot of conversation around how to help groups think through that holistically, just so that those costs and those realities can be integrated from the jump. And it's great to see, how many groups are creative with that. Again, it's inspiring to me is groups that find creative ways to minimize how much goes in the landfill. So that they are finding ways to recycle, reuse, or creatively too with art and displays, utilities and utilitarian uses in their own homes or yards or communities. There's all sorts of things that people use. An example in Southeast, there's a cleanup in Tenakee, just kind of southwest of Juneau, and Tenakee Springs, and they actually used foam. After they cleaned it off, they used an insulation in some cabins they were building. They kind of reshaped and recut it and were able to install it. So examples of these cool opportunities for people to really think of things and for what they can do and what they can use them for. So in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and skip ahead slightly just on to point out one example of this. Kind of creative disposal was project on Casco or Forster Island in Southeast Alaska or off of Southeast. The cool thing I think about this was you had a group of State of Alaska Department of Fish and Game leading the project. They deployed crews onto small boats as part of field activities. But then, they shipped debris to Seattle by a catch can for disposal, using tender support from Alaska General Seafood. So you had the fishing industry helping out. So they were able to backhaul some of this, reducing cost. You had Net Your Problem facilitating elements of the recycling. So that's obviously beneficial, reducing how much is going to landfills. And they also were doing research to look at microfouling or biofilm on the debris to see, what kind of prevalence of that was and what the substance of it was, and how that all worked together. So really, I think it's a great example. This one project, they cleaned up over 11,000 pounds of debris, but it's really cool to see the multi-faceted layers of the project that was included. One other to highlight is bio-based cooler and composting project. So this is actually a project to use mycelium or fungi root structures as a bio-based alternative to single-use coolers. So many of you are aware, for recreational or charter, often you're using styrofoam single-use coolers. Take home your cash, whether that's back to your house or shipped to people who were visiting from Boston. I remember I was one time on a work trip to Boston, and just everything that came off was from several families have been on a lodge trip, I guess. So you see it coming all off on the carousel. So this would be a way to make that more sustainable. So it's working with the University of Alaska Anchorage researchers, plus local campus in Homer. But the idea is to look at ways to pilot this as an alternative to foamed plastics that's biodegradable, that still has the same food safety and insulative properties that are needed for that use. And you can see here kind of an early example of an early prototype. It's now they've gotten a lot better, but a lot bigger, I should say. And so they're working on that right now. We were just visiting with them earlier, a few months ago. So, and they also have partnerships with local fishers based in Homer who are working on integrating this and testing it to see how it could work. So being mindful of time, I'm going to skip ahead to just kind of this one kind of remaining thing, which is an effort that we've been looking at over time is building out an Alaska action plan on marine debris. Actually, some folks who are part of this conversation have been engaged with it. But the concept is to try to put together something that captures what's already happening in Alaska, the gaps and needs, what are the challenges that are identified. I've already talked about some of those, as well as the priorities, what should be done in the future. And really try to build that consensus, especially I think we're in a unique moment, if you will, in time in the Alaska Marine Debris Project or efforts, because we have a lot of groups that have built a lot of experience over the years. And that veteran knowledge is so valuable, right? And they've been doing this for a long time. Then you also have new groups coming into the space, into the topic area with new ideas and new energy. And so it's an important time to capture those hard-earned lessons from the people who have been doing it a while, and also integrate this energy and excitement from groups who maybe are newer and have some new ideas. So you don't want to lose you want to harvest both, to combine them. Harvest is the wrong term, but to combine them. To pull it together in a way that respects the knowledge of people who've hard earned as well as that energy. So if someone says, "Hey, we should do this new thing," then somebody says, "Well, we tried that, in 2000 and whatever, and it didn't work, and here's why." Well, that's an important connection to make, because it could be that something's changed since then. So now we should revisit it. Or it might be, oh, nothing's changed. It's just that it's a good idea that was tried and didn't work for X, Y, and Z reasons. So I think it's a unique moment we're in, and we're excited to get this out. It's right now in review from people who contributed to it, and hope to have it done, or plan to have it done and out, published later this year. Okay, so what's next for Alaska Marine Debris? So first, action plan and completion, utilization. We can see that leading to additional workshops or conversations with folks, and revisions and updates over time. As I said, new partners engagement. There's enthusiasm in the region. It's really great to see, and it's really exciting from my perspective. Been working on the issue in Alaska for a number of years now, and so it's really energizing and exciting to have that coming together. And then also new funding opportunities. With the new attention has come new energy from a funding standpoint as well. And that's been great to see with bipartisan infrastructure law, Murdoch impact area funding, as I mentioned earlier, as well as other opportunities that other groups are leading, which is great. So certainly, and actually right now, through bipartisan infrastructure law, University of Alaska Fairbanks is open to proposals on marine debris, and there's actually a webinar next week on that. So I can send around information on that for those who are interested. So anyway, I know it's been a little bit of a whirlwind, but hopefully it's helpful. I want to say thank you very much for the time, and certainly open to questions if there is time.
Hey, Peter, can you hear us?
Well, he's muted.
Oh, can you hear us, Peter? Peter, thumbs up.
Yes, I can. Sorry, I was coughing briefly.
You can ask questions. We got the audio on.
I have a question.
Yes.
Peter, can you tell us anything about the new Marine Debris Foundation Center that is to be in Juneau?
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited about that. So Marine Debris Foundation is, and I probably should have asked whether you could see me before I talked with my hands so much. But Marine Debris Foundation is it's sort of a separate organization. So there's like National Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife has the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So it's a separate organization that has the ability to do things that the Marine Debris program can't necessarily, or other groups can't. And it's really great. It's been established. It's still kind of getting established or getting spun up. But they're having a facility, a physical presence in Alaska, I think can only be beneficial. As a person who I view part of my job as being biased towards Alaska, that to have a physical presence can only be beneficial for connecting to the issue and understanding the unique nature and also opportunities of the issue in Alaska. So I think there's still early days for establishing, I don't know if they have a physical address yet, but I do know that they're having their board meeting for the foundation is going to be in Sitka coming up at the end of this month. And so I think that's going to be a really exciting thing for a lot of the board members to have the experience to see Alaska firsthand as a place, and also in terms of the context of marine debris as well.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Of course.
you can.
What is being knitted in the front row? I'm fascinated.
Baby blanket?
Nice. Great. One of our good friends knitted a baby blanket for my older son, and he was one of his absolute favorites. So I'm sure whomever's lucky enough to receive it will be very happy to have it.
All right. Thank you.
Mute. Start video.
Yeah.
I said.
Okay.
And then.
All right, just start. Perfect. Great. Thanks.
My thanks to you, Christina Turman, for so I showed up today and I forgot my presentation. It wasn't on the thumb drive. And my laptop wouldn't talk to the Wi-Fi here. So I just, anyway, and so then I got a fast ride out to the place I'm staying, which is at Kate's place, grabbed my hard drive, came back, and anyway, everything worked out.
It all works.
And so I'm glad, and I'm very thankful for you allowing me to come and talk to you. Peter's done an excellent job telling you about the marine debris problem. So I have some slides at the beginning of this presentation, and I'll probably move through those fairly quickly to get to the part where I'm focusing on, which is what do we do with that marine debris once it comes to land? And also in the greater context is what do we do with other plastics as well? I always like to start off with, how much plastic is there in the world? And what if you took every piece of plastic an Alaskan uses as a consumer and you sent it all to me, I would end up with 17 million pounds of plastic, rough round numbers. And so that's a lot of plastic, but there's a lot more. And other places where you wouldn't necessarily, just talked about marine debris. I did an estimate of how much plastic marine debris is on our beaches. And I can go through this with you later about how I estimated it. And it is an estimate, and I'll tell you it's an estimate, and it's got all kinds of probably flaws in it, but at least it's a place to start the conversation. But my estimate is there's between 75 and 125 million pounds of plastic each year coming onto our beaches. So if I'm really a lousy estimator, maybe it's off by a factor of 10. That's still like 7.5 to 12.5. And that may be the right number, but that's 7.5 million pounds is half as much as we produce as a state. And it's coming onto our beaches, and typically, as Peter pointed out, from other places. So it's a significant problem. And what makes it even more difficult, and Peter pointed this out really well, is it's really challenging to get this off. These beaches are remote. They're on the Gulf, and it's just hard to get to them. They're weather bound. But another issue, landfill wise, is that 4 of the 5 largest cities in Southeast Alaska, and we know this because Christina lives in one and you might live in another, but Sitka, Wrangell, Petersburg, and Ketchikan are all shipping their trash to that location Peter Murphy talked about in Eastern Oregon. So we're already shipping marine debris to the lower 48, barging it up. And there's a chance that there may be other cities joining them because there's landfills that are filling, and we don't necessarily have a solution in hand for whether we have a replacement or we're gonna have to barge it. So if we can reduce the amount going into the landfill, obviously that's a good thing. The one that I was surprised by when I started this project, I started the project focusing on plastic ocean waste. There's all this plastic ocean waste. I want to bring it in and convert it into something useful. And then I realized there's probably not enough of that to make a business work. You needed more volume. So then I started looking at post-consumer recycling and developing programs to pull in post-consumer recycling and a broader range than maybe what's currently accepted. So I'll take all 2s and all 5s, for example, because I can use both of those in our product. But what I also found is there's industries out there, such as the ones in the North Slope, where they produce a tremendous amount of plastic as well. And it's very high grade plastic. One of them is the North Slope. They ship the well pipe that goes into the ground up to the North Slope with pre-threaded well pipe. So there's outside threads on one side and inside threads on the other. And then they put these caps on the ends, these thread protectors, when they ship it from wherever it comes from. It's not made in Alaska. And then when they get ready to put it in the ground, they take those caps off. And there's right now 400 super sacks filled with thread protectors at the Milne site alone on the North Slope. And I know this because they're sending it to me in 53-foot trailers at the rate of about 2 a week right now at their cost. And so you'd mentioned 600, I think we're now closer to 700,000 pounds because this plastic is so abundant. And this is just one of the many sources. The other one, and I'll get off this, there's a lot of plastic in the world conversation because I think I'm preaching to the choir. But I was shocked by how much plastic is used in the freight business. And I really hadn't thought about it. But if you have a 40-foot open trailer, it's wrapped in plastic. If you have a pallet, it's wrapped in plastic. So I went out and I did some Googling, which anybody would want to try to figure out the answer to these questions. And there's been a study done, and it turns out that, based on this, there's roughly 20,000 to 40,000 pounds of film plastic per big box store in the major metropolitan area per year. So the amount of plastic there alone could build a business out of. So this is what plastic ocean waste looks like on the left. We've seen this in some of the pictures you saw earlier, but when it gets to me, I grind it up. And when it's ground up, it looks like what you see on the right. And that is it's got fibrous and filament type of look to it. There's flex in there from the hard plastics. And that's what we actually turn into grizzly wood, which is our recycled plastic lumber. I just want to throw this picture up because it strikes me as why I'm doing this. I went out on a marine debris cleanup in the Prince William Sound, and I walked up to the high water line and pulled back the brush because I'd read some papers that this is where all the microplastics are. I thought, oh, okay, I'll go see. So I walked up and I literally just picked a spot at random, and that's my boot right there. And this is what I saw, and it just shocked me. All of these little microplastics, which were macroplastics at one point, they were on the beach, they got weathered, the salt water, the UV, the sun, and the wave action broke them into smaller pieces, and they got thrown up into the brush, and they're going to be covered and left there. And the life of a plastic is 25 to 50 years, maybe longer, before it can decompose to the point where it's decomposable. On the left, this is just a couple quick other examples. There's 18 miles of HDPE pipe sitting at one of the aquaculture facilities in the Prince William Sound. It's been sitting there for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, 10 years. Over the decades, they've just stored it up there. On the right, those are the 400 to 500 sacks Chilkoot sending to us. That's a picture from the North Slope last September. So there's a lot of plastic in the world. So what do we do with the plastic? The traditional solution is what's called a hub and spoke model. So in a hub and spoke model, is my time up? Thank you very much. In a hub and spoke model, what happens is you build a large facility in a hub area, hub city typically. And the spokes are all the feeders that bring material into that facility. And what makes that work is that the way in which you bring it in is on road and rail. And in the lower 48, that's inexpensive. We can do that for pennies a pound. But that doesn't work in Alaska because everything in Alaska, as we know, is barge and air. I mean, there are some road, but really when you think about taking something from Alaska to the lower 48, there's no rail line. There's no rail line that goes from Alaska through Canada to the lower 48. If you want to get it down there in bulk, you got to put it on a barge. If you want to get it there fast, then you got to pay a lot and you got to put it in the air. And so anyway, I thought, well, this model's broken. It doesn't work in Alaska because freight, and this is true for any entrepreneurial endeavor, is the first thing you have to look at in Alaska is what is the freight cost for this? What does it cost to get materials and supplies in? And what is it going to cost for you to take your product and get it to your market, wherever that market may be? So ideally in that scenario, what you want to do is you want to get your materials locally and you want to sell your product locally. Okay, so as best as you can, try to take freight out of the equation. So that's what I was endeavoring to do. So here's what we have is we have the distributed recycling model where we will collect plastics locally. Let's use Haines as our example. So we'll collect the plastics at HFR. And we'll not just collect marine debris plastics, which will come from Tracy this coming week. She'll bring her plastics in and we hope to be able to store those plastics at HFR. But also HFR's got plastics from their post-consumer recycling. So those are stored in a location. And then I bring in my equipment and I convert that into something useful. In this case, what I'm going to convert it into is a recycled plastic lumber, dimensional lumber, 2x4s, 2x6s, 4x4s, 6x8s, which I call grizzly wood. Why do I call it grizzly wood? Because it's easy to remember. I want you to remember because I want you to buy it. Because if you buy it, then I can keep doing what I'm doing. But that's the model. is a distributed processing model. So instead of us taking the material and moving it to a centralized location, we take the processing equipment and make it mobile. We stockpile the plastics and bring the processing equipment in, process what we've got, and then move that processing equipment to another community. This is the plastics that we're currently processing. So I'll take number 2s, number 4s, number 5s, and in the other category is nylon. So I also will use nylon, and we make recycled plastic lumber from that. What you're seeing on the outside here, these are the people that have been funding this project. We've been very fortunate. We got matching funds from the Small Business Innovation Research Project from Alaska. The EPA funded a phase 1 and a phase 2 SBIR. We got NOAA Marine Debris Challenge funding from NOAA, which we're using now. USDA funded a phase 1 SBIR. We submitted our phase 2 proposal recently. We're hoping will be competitive. We've got from the 49th State Angel Fund, some angel funding, and the Alaska Sea Grant is administering the NOAA program. So these are the places where we've been able to find funding. And to date, I've been successful in getting $1.5 million of funding to work on this project. I've written 15 different proposals, and 5 of them have won, and that's the result of that. This is what we do when we make grizzly wood, is we take plastic ocean waste, this post-industrial resins, things like these thread protectors from the North Slope, and post-consumer resins, the recyclates, and we put them into a grinder and grind them up. Make them into small flakes or granules, and that's dropped into this machine that you see right here in the front. This large machine here has a feeder. I'll show you a caricature of this in just a moment. And it takes these pellets and it moves it through using an auger through a barrel. And on the outside of that barrel are heaters. And those heaters then successively get warmer, going from say 320 degrees Fahrenheit to say 480 degrees Fahrenheit. And during that process, the plastic melts and becomes molten. And as a molten plastic, then you can push it into a form. And in a form, when you leave it set, it takes on that shape. So you can squeeze it into a 2x4 form, let it cool, and out comes 2x4s. So that's the process. It's a mechanical process. Heat and an auger is what we're using. It's not sophisticated. What's innovative here is the fact that we put all of this into a 53-foot trailer, which you see here. And that trailer can move from community to community to community. All I need in addition to that, and you see here, that white thing on wheels is a 100 kW generator that I rent from NC Power in Anchorage. And then I bought a conveyor that was used for woodlots and repurposed it for conveying plastics. And we don't need water. This is the system. So this is a character I mentioned. This is how the mechanical process works. So to revisit this, we've got granules that we've done. We ground up this plastic and we drop that into this hopper. And it comes in as solid plastic, and then it gets moved through the auger. And as it does, there's these heating elements that are wrapped around the barrel. So we're seeing a cross-sectional view of this. And they get successively warmer, as I said, to the point that when it gets here, it's molten and it can be squeezed into different shapes. Once those shapes are full, then you detach that shape, which we call a form, and you can put an empty one in and repeat the process. So this is it. This is the magic. This has been around for 30 years. So this is our business model, if you will. We collect, this is from Seward Marine Industrial Complex. We stockpile, brought our equipment in, made some grizzly wood, and in this case, we made it into some picnic tables, which were big sellers last summer. Generally, the benefits of plastic lumber versus real lumber. I think that the biggest selling point is the fact that it's incredibly low maintenance and high durability. We're looking at markets like trail rehabilitation, parks and recreation, car stops, things that are outdoors. They're not structural, so we're not holding a weight other than maybe a deck board, and they need to last a really long time in rough weather. So when you're talking about trail rehabilitation, for example, this is an ideal kind of scenario because you got a lot of ground contact, And you want it to last a long time, and you don't want to have to do maintenance. We just sold 650 pieces of lumber to Homer Trail Alliance for a trail rehabilitation project that they're doing this summer. And we're going to deliver the second batch of those on Thursday to complete that order. Here's some other applications. In addition to decks and boardwalks, we can bike racks, retaining walls. And in the retaining wall category, I have garden boxes, signposts, fencing, park benches, and picnic tables. So you'll notice that all of these applications are outdoor. This is not a material, this is not a piece of lumber you would put in a stud in a wall, because it's very flexible. The flexibility of this is very high. You need something much more rigid if you're going to build it inside a structure, and that's not where this material is best used. Tables were a big seller for us last year. We sold 17 of those. These are 7 that we built when we were in Soldotna, and we thought we'd build a mini table. So he's not just a big man. All right, it's a small table, but we thought, it'd be kind of fun. The park bench we've designed, we've yet to sell one. I think the price is too high. We have to sell it for $1,500. This is the pilot demonstration system I told you about, but what I'd like to do is tell you where we went. So we wanted to demonstrate last year our portability. So we went to 4 different communities in 5 months. We started off in Palmer, then we went to Soldotna, spent a month of June in Soldotna, a month of July in Anchorage. We came back to Palmer in August, and then went down to Seward in September. And we processed plastics in each of those communities. This is what the system looked like when we brought it into Soldotna. This was as we were setting up, and here's after the setup. And you can see we were making some tables. It was a wet summer, so we had a lot of tents. Our 53-foot trailer gets pulled up. We hook up the generator, we hook up the conveyor, we put our tents out, and we start pulling bags up and start sorting and making gristlewood. This is the Seward. I liked showing this one, not only because I like Seward, but we had a high diversity of plastic sources here. We got a marine debris cleanup, actually 2 of them. The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance provided us plastics, and also the National Park Service does a cleanup, and that was done that year. We pulled their plastics in. We did our own collection locally through Sustainable Seward. So we had a collection program, and we would go out and we could put 2 super sacks in one of these dumpsters. And then we would come back about every 2 weeks and empty it out. We postponed that program. It's a good idea, but it's just a lot of logistics that are difficult for us. We went to the Kenai Peninsula Borough, and we had them give their roll-ups. So they have a recycling center, and they brought their number 2s over, and they dumped the number 2s right in our lot, this lot here. And 25 super sacks later, we had it all repackaged in super sacks. That took a day, and it was backbreaking work. Oh my gosh. And we also got bales of plastic from cruise ships that came into Seward. And this is a great resource, I think, for down here in Southeast, especially if we're talking about expanding some of what we're doing into Skagway, where there's a lot more cruise ship traffic. But they bail their 1s and 2s, and they would drop those off at the Seward Recycling Center. And they would then ship them to Anchorage, and we intercepted them. This is what the pilot system looked like once we got it set up in Seward. It looks just like the system we had in Soldotna, it's just a different spot. And then in Palmer, where we have the majority of our plastic, this is one of those panoramic shots you can take with a cell phone that you never quite understand how it works. But right now, these piles, this was almost a year ago. We have these piles, another layer high here, and then this whole area is filled up, and then beyond that's filled up. We have a lot of plastic. And so we're right now focusing on converting that into recycled plastic lumber. And this is a combination of thread protectors, post-consumer, and marine debris. It's a bit of each. So this is what the Palmer facility, we made a lot of picnic tables, as I said. This is some of the product we made last summer. And we went to Anchorage for a pilot. What I like to talk about with this is we go to Anchorage, and they said, hey, we've got all these trash cans that we've taken out of service, these carts, the ones that you put out at the curb. And it's a number 2 plastic, and gosh, can you use them? And I said, well, we'll try. So we looked at them. There's a lot of metal in them. So we had to take all the metal out, and then they were too big for us just to stick it, it into our grinder directly. So we had to resize it. So that's what you see here. I call it resizing, cutting it up. So you cut it up, you pull out the metal, and sure enough, it makes a great picnic table. So that in the lower right used to be trash cans. And now we made it into 2x4s and 2x6s and a little couple mini tables. So we're really proud of that. We also had the senator come by, and I like to brag. So anyway, but we've had strong support from Senator Murkowski. Let me skip through this. And this, and this. So let me back up just a second. So we have now, we're focusing on selling grizzly wood. And why are we focusing on that? I mean, why is the sale so important? The sustainability of this effort is going to depend on our ability to build sales channels to move product. If we can't do that, then there's no money coming into the system, and then we're completely dependent on subsidies. And I don't want to be a subsidy-based business, or at least to the greatest extent possible, minimize that. So the way in which you do that is you produce a product that generates enough revenue that you can feed the rest of the system with the revenue. And that's our goal. We can do that at $2 a pound. I believe we can do that at $2 a pound. And that's the industry rate right now for Trex, bareboard, tangent materials. If you break it down and you figure out how much of that 2x4 weigh, and you figure out the cost, it's $2 a pound. So in our unit price here, you see that's the cost for, let's take, for example, an 8-foot grizzly wood 2x4 weighs 15 pounds, and we would sell that for $30. That's the industry rate. But on the other hand, I'm subsidized right now, and I want to get product into market. I want to get this moving and get it into people's hands so we can see how it can be used, and use that to build confidence in the product. So what we decided to do in 2024 only is, and maybe this was a bad idea, I'll take credit or I'll take the blame, it doesn't matter, I made the decision. We cut our costs down to the same price as pressure treated lumber. So we will sell grizzly wood in 2024. We are selling grizzly wood in 2024 for the same price that you would sell regular wood. Now, its lifespan is 50 years. So, you're going to get a lot more life out of a piece of grizzly wood than you would. So it's a bargain from that perspective. And that's usually our selling advantage. But what I'm telling you is that if you want grizzly wood, now's the time to buy. Okay. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Really are. You have time for questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Yes, sir.
So do you do any work using your round plastic extruder to control the color of the product?
No, we color in, color out. We could, but it adds an extra level of complexity. So the question is, can we sort color? And can we take like all the reds and all the blues and all the greens? And you'll notice a lot of our plastic, recycled plastic lumber when we first started out was green, because we had just a ton of green thread protectors, and we just wanted to see how the system worked, and we pushed it through. But now everything, well, as Henry Ford said in 1922, I think, in his book, you can have any color Model T Ford you want, as long as it's black. So, I think we're going to go to gray black. That's going to be our color. And then the question is, where is the market for color specific? So, and I'll finish this off with what my wife has told me I need to do. And if I'm a good husband, I'll listen to my wife and I'll do what she tells me, right? Happy wife, happy life. She says I need to make a pink picnic table. Okay, so I'm working on it. So we'll see what we can do with that. Yes.
How do you sort the types in the debris plastic?
So we call them clears and hard plastics. So when I have somebody come in that's sorting, we're getting a general laborer, and we're probably bringing them in with a limited skill set. But that's what we have available. And we usually get local labor, and we usually have them for a few days, and then for whatever reason, they move on, probably because the work is hard. So we try to simplify it as much as possible. So we say if it's clear, it's a 1, put it over here in this super sack. And if it's a hard plastic, put it over here. If it's metal or anything else, put it in this bag. And then if we also separate film plastic. So if it's flexible, put it in a different bag. So we have these super sacks sitting around, and we bring a super sack in and we sort through them. And in terms of the hard plastics, which we use to make the grizzly wood right now, we can do 2s and 5s, and they are miscible. They will melt well together. So we're not too concerned about it. In terms of contaminants, if it's really dirty, we'll set it aside. But for the most part, a little bit of contamination isn't a problem. So what is a little bit of contamination? Labels on bottles. We'll take the labels and just leave them right on. I mean, it just doesn't matter to us. And you'll see little flecks in our lumber, but it got ground up and burned in the process.
What about PVC?
We don't take PVC. We will set that aside.
So your laborer has to actually.
We have tried to train them that if it's black and it's pipe, set it over here, because most of your PVC is black pipe. The PVC buoys that you see in the fishing, we just don't take those. So, and the reason is when polyvinyl chloride, which is number 3, is melted, it gives off a chloride gas, and it's nasty for people and it's nasty for equipment. So we just don't mess with it. Also, we don't take polystyrene. Right now, we just don't have a use for it. So if it's a marine debris cleanup, we have taken a lot of styrofoam because we want to find a use for it, and I want to have it in stock and available, but we haven't gotten to the point yet. Our next step is grizzly bricks. So we're taking number 1s, and we've been stockpiling those and grinding those. It's polyethylene terephthalate, it's PET. It's a much denser plastic. The density of that is 1.3 relative to 1, which is water, and ATP and polypropylene are like 0.95. So it's a denser plastic, but it's also a little more brittle. It doesn't do well when it's stretched across. So it works nice in bricks or something compact. And so we're taking that, and it turned out, we found out that you can use recycled glass as an additive for that, and you get 50% better compressibility. So we're taking a recycled glass, recycled plastic, recycled PET combination to make recycled plastic bricks. And that's the proposal that I've just recently submitted to USDA for phase 2. And we would build a module, a 20-foot module, and add it into the portfolio of what we've got here. So we would have a grind module, we'd have an extruder module, we'd have a grizzly brick module.
Do you have an estimate of how many people you employ? I mean, I know it's seasonal and.
Yeah, we like to have 3 on site at a minimum when we're operating in operations. I have 1 person half-time helping me with marketing and sales. And then I do everything else. So I'm the bookkeeper and I order the parts, I pick up the parts, I deliver the product, I do sales. I'll go write grant. I'll do, yeah. But when you're an entrepreneur, you do all those things. That's just part of being an entrepreneur. We've had, I think, 10 or 12 different employees. And this past month, I've had 7 employees with as many as 5 working at one time. So we're growing a little bit, and it's exciting. And it's so much better to do it when it's not -20 out. Oh, it's cold.
Share at all the vision for what's going to be happening here?
Thank you. I thought I had a slide for that. I did. So we have written a proposal. By we, I mean Tracy's group, HFR. We also have included CIA and Chilkoot, and a couple organizations in Juneau, where we would expand what we're doing. So right now we're funded to go to Yakutat and Sitka to do pilot demonstrations in each of those communities over the next 2 years. We've got plastic stockpiled in Yakutat. I'm behind the 8 ball of it in Sitka. So that's where we're at. And then if we got the funding, we would expand to Haines and Juneau, and we would do a Haines, Juneau, Sitka trip every year. We'd visit each of those cities. And then every other year we would swing up and get to Yakutat, because it's much more expensive to get up there and back with the equipment. So that's where we're at as of today. We might be able to accelerate that a little bit, and we're looking at that, but there's still too many things in the works to say anything publicly about it. So, yeah.
If I can just And we've been working together a lot in the last 36 hours. Things have been moving.
Yes, they
And
have.
over here on the table, there's a white model that Kate put together of our proposed new design from the center. You can take the roof off and you can see some of what what we're looking at.
I think the long-term vision for HFR, and you should speak to this, is to have a micro hub here that would process plastics, and you could bring plastics in.
Sorry, we are starting to
Oh,
run out of time.
I'm sorry.
So no, it's a great conversation, but we need to move into our training because the library does close at 7.
Thank you. And I left cards over here. I'll be around and ask me questions later.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.